This week, Boris Johnson will be grilled on live television for up to 5 hours on whether he lied to Parliament. If he did lie, what should the punishment be?
Will it be gripping entertainment, won't it?
It definitely will be.
I'm sure Boris will make sure of it, and I'm sure there'll be a whole carnival and bravado before. We've got lawyers releasing his defence in advance of his hearing. I mean, the issue is, if he's found culpable, then he will be in breach of parliamentary standards and there will be a punishment applied. I think he and his advisers know full well. The problem with that is, if that were to happen, he probably could never come back to the front line of senior politics again. And we all know that Boris wants to retain the option of becoming Prime Minister of this country once again. That's how he sees himself, okay? And there are significant elements of the Conservative Party who share that view. So for him, it's avoiding sanction is centrally important for that reason and that reason alone. If there is a finding that's impossible to say is biased or prejudiced or motivated by party politics, which shows that he misled deliberately or willfully or lied to the House of Commons, that means it's very hard to believe he can ever be Prime Minister of this country again. So the stakes are incredibly high in terms of Boris's perception of his own future.
So why do you think he's releasing his defence in advance? Do you think he's probably got a whole strategy involved to how?
Because there are always two issues going on. One is the war for public opinion.
Yeah.
What does the public think in the end? Can he win that war? And then there's the war with the technical, political realities that he faces in front of the parliamentary committee. Let's be honest, it would be interesting to know how many of those MPs genuinely are undecided, how many of them have already made their mind up, and how many of them will have their arms twisted by their political party.
Because they claim it's a free vote, they're not going to twist it themselves.
Of course. But the actual committee, though, findings, we've got to remember that's the first stage. There won't be much of a vote if the committee findings are a damp squib. So it will be really interesting to see. And I think the defence that he's going to use, which is quite an interesting one on the whole, is that the advice he received in advance of addressing Parliament was that no rules had been breached. So when he stood up, had been told by his civil servants, this is what he's going to try and claim, that no rules have been breached. Therefore, when he stood up and said that in Parliament, that was not willfully or deliberately misleading anybody, because that was the advice he was received. Of course, the counter-argument to that is, but you, Boris Johnson, were attending some of these parties. You, Boris Johnson, knew that no party should be taking place. You, Boris Johnson, knew full well that you were in breach of your own rules.
Yeah. Shadman, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Ivan fully. It's going to be gripping drama, and I think there is the
drama series.
Well, drama series and maybe Netflix series. Instead of Harry and Meghan, they can focus on Boris. But I think there is the political reality and there is the public reality, where technical reality. I think Boris has gone for the Trump route, where even if he loses the technical reality and he's found to be guilty or is found to have breached or misled Parliament, he wants to win the public opinion.
Do you think there's any way that he could lose the technical side but win the public side and then get back into senior politics again?
I think we are into very uncharted territory in British history in terms of whether he is sanctioned, what sanctions goes against him, and whether it is upheld by Westminster. It's very difficult, but I don't see how he morally can come back to the front of...
Do you think he forget about morals, because I think he'll forget about morals as well. Do you think he can?
Well, I don't know if... it's difficult to predict the future, but one thing I can say is Rishi Sunak is very nervous. This is one of the most defining weeks of Rishi Sunak's prime ministership.
Yeah. We also need to understand that there's legality here. So there's ethics, there's morality, there's what you might believe is obvious, and then there's legality. And what Boris's lawyers will try and prove is the law. And they will say, I would imagine, that if he stood up in good faith, and the good faith, of course, will have to be demonstrated by they'll publish all the civil servants' advice to him, and said that there was none of these events breached the rules at the time, because it says here, this is what I was told to say by the civil service, they will say, whether you think morally or ethically that stacks up, i.e. whether it's credible from saying that, they'll say, but legally you cannot find him to have breached the parliamentary standards stuff. That's what they will try and say. So it's very complicated, this, because also in the end the parliamentary committee will receive legal advice as well, remember. And the legal advice and the technical advice they receive will be every bit as important as the politics.
But Ivan, this is my question to you, because you have been in parliament for so long. Is the parliamentary guidelines or this code of conduct, is it a guideline, or is it a law, or is it like a statute and a law?
I think that most of this stuff is not about the law. It's about standards, acceptable minimum standards.
But do you not think that if Boris Johnson, even if he loses the pub,
by the way, we already know. Well, let's be honest. He's already been found guilty of behaving in an unlawful way, which is why the police served him with a fixed penalty notice. So you were going to say sorry.
So if he loses the actual legal vote, but he wins the public vote, do you think there's a chance he can get back into big politics again?
I think if he's found to have misled Parliament, it depends how the public perceive it. If they perceive it as a stitch-up by politicians hostile to Boris Johnson, rather than objective and fair process, which of course is what Boris will attempt to present it as, and of course the Sue Gray appointment by Keir Starmer will be thrown into this mix in big time. Okay, if he's able to present, either if the committee is not able to say he deliberately misled Parliament, that to some extent lets him off the hook. Okay, or if the committee says he did deliberately mislead Parliament, but the perception of the public is a political stitch-up, it's not been a fair process, Boris has played the victim successfully, then of course we don't know. And as Shadman says, we're in uncharted territory here. Let's be honest, not just in Britain but around the world. Look at what's happening with Trump. Trump's saying openly in America right now he expects to be arrested on Tuesday.
That's the latest question. Yeah.
Okay, so we're in uncharted territory. What do I believe? I believe that Boris Johnson believes he has this incredible self-confidence that only he is the saviour of this country, that he deserves a second chance at being Prime Minister, a la his political hero Winston Churchill, by the way, because he sees himself in that light. And there are significant swathes of the Conservative Party who still believe he is the best man to lead their party. Now, do I believe that it's looking less and less likely this can happen before a general election? If I'm honest, I think Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, whatever we think of them and whatever we think of the budget, have stabilised the ship to some extent. But of course, if they lose the next election, which also looks increasingly likely, then it's highly unlikely that Rishi Sunak will survive. In fact, he won't survive. Okay, and at that point, what will happen is, if the election victory for Labour, if it happens, is relatively slim, Boris will come back immediately. If it's quite a sizable majority, of course, Boris will not come back immediately because he won't want to waste 2 years of his life being the leader of the opposition. But of course, Boris Johnson believes, and significant swathes of the Conservative Party, that he should be the leader again and that the country would be best led by him. I don't share that view, but many sections, a significant section of the Conservative Party still have that view.
Also, do not underestimate Boris Johnson's personal rivalry with David Cameron. The fact that Cameron was Prime Minister for 6 years, whereas Boris has only been Prime Minister with double the majority Cameron ever could wish for only 3 years, must hurt him every night. It must kill his sleep.